Hello, and thanks to everybody at the BNPA for joining us today. I'd particularly like to thank Dr. Valerie Voon for the invitation to join you and to share a little bit about our ongoing BrainGate research. I'm going to focus my presentation on some of what I think will be the mutually interesting neuroscience of what we've been doing, as well as some of the clinical progress that we've made over the past several years in developing an intracortical brain-computer interface that we hope is going to help people to restore communication and mobility. Just a few disclosures. No personal financial disclosures. I am quite grateful to the support provided by the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs, the National Institutes of Health, several of the institutes of the NIH, and the philanthropies that you see listed there as well. The most important disclosure by far, though, are the great group of people who I get to work with every day. Those are folks who are across disciplines in engineering and systems engineering, neuroscience, computational neuroscience, neurosurgery. And as I think many of you are aware, on a screen like this, it is completely appropriate to ignore the people whose faces you see, because all of the real work that's been done over the past 15 years has been done by the folks whose names are listed on the right, many of whom are our close colleagues, our students, our postdocs, our graduate students, who really deserve the credit for the work I'll be presenting. So brain-computer interface, this phrase has become more and more common over the past decade. And just one overview slide, at least to describe the way that I think of brain-computer interfaces, regardless whether it's the one I'm going to describe to you or any other brain-computer interface, they all have three main components. One is a neural sensor, a decoder, and then the assistive technology. So for somebody who is losing or has lost the ability to move their arm or hand as the result of, for example, a brainstem stroke, or as the progressive result of motor neuron disease, first we need to find a signal in the brain that is related to the intention to move. And that intention to move is what we're trying to record in real time from any number of locations in the brain. But really what we need to focus on first in designing a BCI is what signal do we want to use. There are lots of signals available, as you all know, in the brain to record from. I'm going to be focused primarily on the signal that can be recorded by getting up close to neurons and recording individual action potentials from an ensemble of neurons. But there are plenty of other signals to record from as well. We also have to choose an area or areas of the brain that we would find relevant, particularly for the control of an external device. So in our case, we're going to be interested in recording from areas of the brain involved in the voluntary control of movement. But for other types of brain-computer interfaces, particularly those that'll be relevant to people with mental health disorders or for people with types of neuropsychiatric disease, I think that thinking about different areas other than perhaps just the motor cortex will, of course, become important. And then, having answered the signal and area questions, then we have to choose a sensor that's appropriate to record from those locations and to get the signal of interest. We then will take that signal, put it into a black box. That black box is the home of my friends in computational neuroscience who really have one of the most fun jobs in the world, which is to really begin to understand the language of the nervous system and to convert, in our case, a series of action potentials being recorded from an ensemble of neurons and converting it back into their original intent, if you will. That is the intent to control an external device. Finally, before we're done designing a brain-computer interface, we have to think a little bit about what we'd like that device to do. For somebody who's suddenly become locked in, who has lost the ability to move and to speak, and perhaps only has retained some eye movement, if we could restore the ability to control a cursor on a computer screen or to browse the internet for education or entertainment, those would all be valuable returns of function that would likely improve quality of life. You see listed there several other technologies that could be controlled by a person using a brain-computer interface. And possibly, from the standpoint of those of us gathered today at the BNPA annual conference, the idea of closed-loop neuromodulation and of using signals recorded in the brain to drive or to at least gate the return of a neuromodulation system that would stimulate other parts of the brain, again, to help to provide stability from a mental health standpoint, or any number of other useful interventions, I think may become one of the most widely used types of brain-computer interfaces, at least in the future. So I'm now going to cavalierly and completely inappropriately skip about 50 years of fundamental neuroscience to get to the beginning of a pilot clinical trial. I'll briefly just describe what's on your screen, which is the cartoon version of what we've now been doing for more than 15 years. In the lower left, I believe my cursor is visible, you can see an array of electrodes, commonly known as the Utah array, the BrainGate array, the Neuroport array. That is a 4x4 millimeter, that is baby aspirin sized array that has 100 electrodes on it, each of which is 1.5 millimeters in length. That array can be tapped into the top of the brain, as shown in the upper left. More than one of them are now commonly placed. Today, they're all connected by fine wires to a pedestal, and that pedestal protrudes up above the top of the head. When our user in the BrainGate system is using the system, they will then, or the BrainGate trial is using the system. If everything works the way that we're hoping, they will then imagine or attempt to use their own hand. And if our decoders, that is the black box, are working as desired, they'll be able to control an external device simply by thinking about the movement of their own hand. We've now been doing this for more than 15 years. There have been 14 participants in the BrainGate clinical trial, and what's listed on the right is an approximation of the number of other participants that have been recruited to very similar trials, not only in the US, but across the world. This slide gets updated every so often as I hear that additional participants have been recruited. Ones on the top and in the middle have all been using the same Utah array. Towards the bottom, in Utrecht and Melbourne, using slightly different technologies, one being an electrocorticographic recording from the surface of the brain, and in Melbourne using a stent. Really, one of the great privileges for me is to work with the BrainGate Research Consortium, to work with the engineers and scientists and clinicians across the institutions whose logos are displayed here. And one of the reasons that it's not only such a privilege, but so much fun, is that every scientific hypothesis, every bit of data gets vetted, often by colleagues at an independent institution, as we try to collect more data, as we share our manuscripts as they're in preparation, and really do our very best to not only replicate our own work independently as often as we can before it gets published, but also really to do whatever we can to move this field forward, to get ever closer to being able to help people with any form of paralysis. So, just to summarize, before getting to the center of today's discussion, what we had been doing for the first 8 years or so, some of what had been found by recruiting people who joined us, and truly extraordinary people who joined us in the trial, with either spinal cord injury or motor neuron disease or brainstem stroke. One of the first things that we learned is that the motor cortex, that is the precentral gyrus, can be engaged for two-dimensional or three-dimensional control of an external device for years after any number of injuries or illnesses that cause paralysis. Folks in our trial, some of whom you see in the videos that are playing, were able to use their intention to move their own hand, to control a computer cursor, to type on a computer screen, to turn on lights and fans in their room, and to control robotic and prosthetic limbs, also to control a virtual functional electrical stimulation device. The array itself, at least in our trial, has provided clinically useful or research useful signals for more than 5 years. That, of course, is an important component to any implanted technology, is that it needs to work, and it needs to work for an extended period of time. There was good progress made in the decoding of these neural activities, and the safety profile continues to be sufficient for us for the research to be ongoing, not only in our hands, but in others as well. So I'm going to get back to some more recent videos and descriptions of how the investigational BrainGate system has been used recently. But I'd like to pause to think a little bit just of the neural signals themselves and what may be encoded in them. So for somebody who's unable to move their own arm or hand, at the very beginning of the trial, I was listening to one of our research technicians interact with a gentleman who had a cervical spinal cord injury. And the request was to ask him to imagine moving his own hand in order to control a cursor on a computer screen. I found that instruction to be not the one that I expected, because when I'm in the neurology clinic and I'm asking someone to demonstrate the power that they have over their hand, I plainly just ask them to move their hand or to try to move their hand, recognizing that due to weakness, perhaps due to stroke, that they may not be able to move that hand the way that they desire and perhaps can't move it at all. But the instruction I felt of imagine was very different than the instruction to just do it or to try to do it. That was questioned, and well, we were asked to put that into hypothesis and testing form. So we asked our participants to watch some movies to begin with. And in the upper left is a vision of a cartoon of somebody who has their hand on a white dot in the middle. They're being triggered to move their hand in this cartoon to the green dot in the lower left. And in movie form, if you look on the lower left of the slide, you can see that illustration is moving its hand down to the green dot. So we asked our participants very simply just to watch a movie of somebody moving their hand to the various targets on the screen. We then asked them to imagine that they were moving their own hand in the same way that the illustration was moving the hand across the screen. And then finally, we asked them to actually attempt to move their own hand in the same way that the movie was playing. So that watch, imagine, attempt represented as WIA. What's on the screen is just from one of our participants, one neuron being recorded during each of these epochs of either watch, imagine, or attempt. This is displayed as a standard peristimulus time histogram that I'm sure that many of you are familiar with. Without going into what exactly is happening at each moment in time, what we can see is that during this watch epoch, when we're recording in the precentral gyrus, even without any instruction to do anything other than watch, we can see some time-locked activity that appears during the watching of the movement of that hand. Asking the same person moments later to imagine moving her own hand, there's then an increase in that activity. Again, time locked to what's happening on the movie. And finally, at the end, when we ask that same person and we're listening to those same neurons, while she attempts to move her hand, we see that there's again an increase in the time-locked activity. So this is, in many ways, what I expected, which is that an attempted movement would generate more well-tuned, more greatly modulating neuronal activity in the precentral gyrus. Of course, right next to it or nearby it is another neuron that's doing exactly the opposite, which is most active, interestingly, during watching, maybe less so during imagining, and certainly less so during attempting. So in this PSTH way of looking at neural activity, these neurons are kind of doing what we expect them to do. However, looking at neural activity by a peristimulus time histogram, this kind of very linear way of thinking of neural activity and focusing primarily on the firing rates of neurons, there may be more information in neural activity than what's embedded in just the firing rate themselves. An interesting way to think of neural activity rather than just firing rates, if we're comparing, to begin with, just one neuron firing over a certain period of time, and then come back at another period of time and listen to that same neuron or watch that same neuron fire again, if we want to compare those two spike trains, Victor and Perper, about 10 plus years ago, developed the method described here where we can assign metrics to compare those two spike trains by either deleting a spike, shifting a spike, or inserting a spike, and adding up the cost of doing all these in order to get those two spike trains to be exactly the same. Now, if we're going to do that not with just a single neuron, but with an ensemble of dozens of neurons, that takes multiple dimensions for sure. So colleagues in lab, Dave Bramman, who was my PhD student, and Carlos Vargas Irwin, took this Victor and Perpera method and applied it to an ensemble of neurons, which they describe as spike train similarity space. And now we can look at an ensemble of neurons at one point in time, compare it to the firing rate of that same ensemble at another moment of time, or in time, and after some assigning pairwise distances and doing some dimensionality reduction, we wind up with a graph that looks like the one on the bottom, a bunch of dots. Each dot represents neural activity during one time epoch, and every other dot just represents the exact same neurons and their activity at some other moment in time. Dots that are close to each other are very similar. Dots that are further away from each other represent quite different neural activity. So now finally getting back to this watch, imagine, and attempt request that we made of a woman with a brainstem stroke who had no functional use of her hands for more than, the time we were recording this, more than 14 years. We got a graph such as the one that's on the screen. So the icons here, the circles, represent the neural activity while she was watching the movie, the crosses while she was imagining moving her own hand, and the stars while she was attempting to move her own hand. And the colors represent our ability to decode what direction she was either watching, imagining, or attempting the movement of her own hand. This, to me, is an important reminder that even when we're recording in a part of the brain that some people might describe as we know what that thing does, it's simple, unquote, it is the motor cortex, and its job is to help to control voluntary movement. We can elicit or we can extract information about whether somebody is simply watching or imagining or attempting to move their own hand. I'll show you a little bit more of that in real time. Right now you're looking at a representation of, or not representation, you're looking at exactly the view that one of our participants had as they were controlling the robot arm on the screen. Participant here with spinal cord injury is imagining or attempting to move his own hand in this case. He's actually attempting to move his own hand in order to capture those targets on the screen. What we've done here, while he's performing the exact same task, is simply move the robot arm away and ask him to again capture the target using the, in this case, the cursor on the computer screen. And the only difference between these two tasks is task 1, he's controlling a robot arm. Task 2, he's controlling a cursor. And again, in the spike similarity space, this is one figure, not two figures on the screen. We can separate whether he is using the cursor or whether he's using the robot, and we can determine, of course, which direction he's attempting to move the cursor or the robot, all from the same neuronal activity being recorded from the precentral gyrus. So whether it's a robot or a cursor, I like to think of this as the ability to distinguish whether somebody is trying to use their fork or their spoon or a pencil or a pen or their laptop or some other device. That the motor cortical recordings have information embedded in them that are more complex, that are more context dependent than the simple direction of the intended movement. I think that has all kinds of implications for how much information we may be able to extract from intracortical recordings, not just for the important task of restoring communication and mobility for people with paralysis, but also for what is arguably the more complex task of understanding changes in mental state and being able to either alert somebody to those upcoming changes or perhaps to intervene to secure better health. So let me hop back now to think a little bit more about restoring communication for somebody with paralysis here, somebody with motor neuron disease. You're looking at the video of a woman with motor neuron disease with ALS who is pointing and clicking by attempting to use her hand. She's putting that cursor over the letters that are on the screen, which are organized in their at the frequency in which they appear in the English alphabet, which is why THE is across the center. And what you're seeing is fairly good point and click control as she is copying the phrase that's on the top of the screen. This was published a few years ago, achieving well greater than 39 correct characters per minute, no word prediction being used, and importantly, this was at the time about 10 times faster than the best EEG, that is the best scalp-based EEG brain-computer interface results that had been recorded by somebody who was with paralysis using the system. So when we saw this and we saw this point and click control, we began to get the sense that we indeed were on our way to developing a technology that may be helpful for restoring communication. We also began to ask ourselves, why are we developing keyboards that are unique and why are we developing communication interfaces at all? There are really good communication interfaces available, generally made by industry, not by an academic lab. And here are two people, both with ALS, who are using completely unmodified tablet computers. Purchased on Amazon Prime, Google Nexus tablets arriving 2 days later. The woman on the upper left who has one array implanted in the motor cortex, therefore at the moment one cable attached to the top of the head, and she is sending an email to one of our colleagues on the research team, much as though anybody would send an email with a tablet computer. Gentleman on the lower right has two arrays in the brain. He also has ALS. Therefore, two of these cables connecting to the rest of the decoding system. He's just opened up YouTube and he's searching for a video to learn more about ALS. So one of our goals in the BrainGate research is to be able to tell somebody that they will never lose the ability to communicate. That is, if we can assure people with ALS that they will never lose the ability to communicate, that will be an advance in the field and hopefully quite relevant to somebody who is losing that ability. The loss of communication, the ability to provide a method of communication by using the same tablet computer as one used before the onset of disease, we believe will be quite valuable. A question that's often asked, though, is how long does it take for somebody to learn how to control a cursor on a computer screen using this type of intracortical brain-computer interface or BrainGate interface? So when I press play, which I'll do in just a moment, you'll see the beginning of the building of a decoder, the building of a filter, that when I press play is completely naive. The participant, here a gentleman with spinal cord injury, is simply attempting to move his own hand from its current location to the target on the screen. And as you saw, right now our decoder pretty much knows nothing. The cursor's winding and kind of wandering around the screen, but every 3 seconds we're informally regressing the neural activity against the known intended direction of the cursor. We know the intended direction of the cursor because we've put the target on the screen, and we know that our participant is trying to move his hand in order to get there. And now, after about 30 plus seconds of my describing this, we're beginning to see emerge the control, the two-dimensional control of the cursor on the screen. And if I allowed this to play for another 2 or 3 minutes, that two-dimensional control would get as reliable and as smooth and as rapid as any two-dimensional control as we've seen to date. So the good news is that the person does not need to learn how to control these devices. The system needs to learn over just a few minutes at most how to best control the cursor on the computer screen in response to that person's own intuitive and reflexive attempts to control the cursor. It may take more time for multidimensional control, such as control of a multidimensional robot arm for reaching and grasping, but at least at this point, the fact that we've been able to reduce what used to be a tens of minutes attempt to get a cursor to be moving to now really just the beginnings of which emerge at 30 seconds, I think is quite exciting. Just to briefly point out that while some of our goal is focused on restoring communication, restoring actual mobility is also important. You're looking at a gentleman with cervical spinal cord injury thinking about using his own hand. Not only are we recording the BrainGate activity, that is the neural activity in his motor cortex, but that same signal is being used to stimulate implanted electrodes that have been placed about his elbow and about his hand, allowing him to flex and extend his own elbow and to open and close his own hand here in order to eat mashed potatoes solely of his own volition. I'll mention that the robot assistive device that's elevating his shoulder is being used still under neural control, but there aren't enough electrodes implanted about his shoulder here in order to affect that movement. So here he's able to feed himself again using this combination of intracortical recording and a functional electrical stimulation system. Very quickly, just in the interest of time, not only is decoding motoric activity important, but there's been good progress made in being able to record speech. There is also good progress recently being made in being able to decode intended handwriting The blue squiggles that you see are neural trajectories of attempted handwriting from somebody who's unable to move their own hand. And very briefly, I'll just play this last video. There may be one more video, but I'll play this video of somebody who is attempting to write with his own hand. That handwriting is being decoded in real time, and he's responding to a free text question describing where he was born. And the speed and emerging accuracy of this handwriting, I think, is very exciting for being able to restore communication and mobility for people with tetraplegia. We're making good progress towards this being a wireless system rather than a large cable that's bringing the neural signals from brain to neural recording system. And in this last video, I'll just show there's a gentleman, again, with cervical spinal cord injury. This is a fluorescent orange neck pillow at the bottom. This is one of the percutaneous transmitters, and as I press play here, what we can see is that he is controlling his Windows Surface tablet. He's imagining or attempting to use his own hand to control that cursor on the computer screen, and he's doing so wirelessly. And this is just Pandora. The music that's playing in the background is the music that he's selected, and it is going over, I think, to click on what is that tiny thumbs up icon as well to like that music. So to sum up, our BrainGate team and many others across the world are using intracortical activity to develop technologies that we believe will improve communication, will improve mobility, will restore independence for people with paralysis. There are still plenty of work to do. Some of those yellow words in the middle there represent areas of current focus, and clearly medical devices at the end of the day are not made and marketed and supported by universities or academic medical centers. Eventually, this type of work needs to be commercialized. And I'm actually quite excited that there are a number of small companies that have entered this space over the past few years to continue to develop ever better brain-computer interfaces. And so with that, I will just highlight, this is clearly a pre-2020 or pre-2021 picture of our BrainGate team at our annual summit meeting. And with thanks to them and with thanks to all of you for your attention, I'll be pausing now and be happy to answer any questions. Thanks so much.